Now we're on Daf Ayin Beis Amid Beis, and the question now is we throw the ball back into the court of Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, who has to follow the Rebbe of his father, and the Rebbe of his father is none other than Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Shimon, who his father has the principle of Chaviv Mitzvah Shaita. And therefore the question is, since Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon can't deny that the proper time for the reaping of the barley for the Omer is at night, therefore it should be Docha Shabbos. Why is the Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon says that it's not overriding the Shabbos? And what are you going to tell me? Well, you could have done the reaping on Erev Shabbos, but we're holding like Rabbi Akiva, that which could be done on Erev Shabbos is not Docha Shabbos. The answer is it could be Docha Shabbos with the principle of Chaviva Mitzvah Shaita. For Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon Lo Shmiele, right? He certainly was aware of the principle of his father's Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita, and therefore it should override the Shabbos, even if he could have cut down the Omer before Shabbos. Elashayni Hasam. When, this is what Rabbi Elazar understood about his father's principle of Chaviv. When do we apply Chaviv Mitzvah Shaita over the Shabbos? That's only in the case of Avodas HaKorban. Sharei Dachas HaShchitas HaShabbos. Once he started the Avodah and he did the Shchita, and now he's up to the Haktoras HaEvarim Vaimurim, is we're going to go ahead and tell him, you started the mitzvah, and the mitzvah was Docha Shabbos, right? All Shabbos b'Shabbato, then go ahead and complete the mitzvah. But in the case of the Omer, there was no overriding of the Shabbos previously. We're just going to do the Ketzira now. And therefore, we're not going to apply the principle of Chaviv Mitzvah Shaita, because that principle only applies when you started to be Docha the Shabbos with that mitzvah. Frekti Gemara LeRebbe Hachinami. Why doesn't Rebbe accept that same logic? And therefore, Dochsa Shchita Shabbos, that once we were already Docha the Shabbos. To really understand this Gemara, you have to be a brisker. What do I mean? The Inyan of Dechia Shabbos is not in the Gavra, it's in the Chefts of Shabbos. Shabbos itself, once it was broken, so to speak, and violated for the sake of the mitzvah, then Shabbos is not crying out, why are you desecrating me? So therefore, at this particular point, we go back to the kasha on Rebbe, because Rebbe, on the one hand, accepts Rabbi Akiva, and he has to accept Rabbi Akiva, because that's his Rebbe's Rebbe, that if it could be performed before Shabbos, it's not Docha Shabbos. On the other hand, in the case where he needs to do the harvest of the Omer on Shabbos, Rebbe holds that it will be Docha the Shabbos. How can it be Docha the Shabbos? El Kasova Rebbe, Ktsiras HaOmer Lo Dachya Shabbos. So until this point, we were always assuming that Ktsiras Omer would be Docha Shabbos, just like the Havas HaOmer is Docha Shabbos. But now the Gemara is interjecting a new principle, a new possibility that Rebbe would hold, that Ktsiras Omer is not Docha Shabbos. Frek the Gemara V'lova Tanan V'chachom Omrim Echad Shabbos V'echad Chol Misholosh Hayabah. In other words, we're going to bring the three Sa'in and cut down the Omer, whether it's Chol or whether it's Shabbos. So clearly we see that Ktsiras Omer is Docha Shabbos. And the Gemara answers, I'm going to see this answer over and over and over again to Lo Rebbe. Rebbe holds that Ktsiras Omer is not Docha Shabbos. What about the next part of the Mishnah says, Chacham Omer Echad Shabbos Echad Chol B'Shlosha B'Shlosh Kupos B'Shlosh Margolos. Again, we see that the Ketziras HaOmer is Docha Shabbos Dulo Rebbe. Again, the Brisa, the Mishnah continues, Uber Shabbos. Remember, we had this Mishnah that they go back and they talk to the person who's doing the Ketzira. They say, Yom Elohem Shabbazu, and he says yes, and they do it over and over 3 times over. Anyway, you see that it overrides the Shabbos and Dulo Rebbe again. Niksar Bayom Kosher, V'dochas HaShabbos. Right? The Mishnah says that the Ketzira is Dochas Shabbos. Man Shamalei Dom Niksar Bayom Kosher, Rebbe. After all, it was Rebbe who said that which the Torah requires is not essential, and therefore, even though the Torah requires Ketzira B'Layla, it's not essential, and you could do the Ketzira Bayom. And here the Mishnah says Niksar Bayom Kosher, so we're talking reflecting, attributing it to the Shita of Rebbe, and yet it says that it's Docha Shabbos. Here we can't answer Delok Rebbe. I mean, we know that this Mishnah has to be attributed to Rebbe because it says that you could do the Ketzira by day. My love Ketzira Lola Krova. The Mishnah here is not talking about the Ketzira Sa'omer, and Enochinami, the Ketzira Sa'omer would not be Docha Shabbos, but rather Hakrova Sa'omer. So that's the final conclusion here at this point. I mean, the Gemara is going to now analyze this, that according to Rebbe, Ketzira Sa'omer is not Docha Shabbos. So the Gemara says the following: V'atanya, what do we do with the following brisa? Rebbe Omer, Vaydaber Moshes Mo'adei Hashem, Ma Talmud Loma. So apparently, if you open up to Vayikra Perek Chof Gimel, which is Parshas Emor, Moshe repeats unnecessarily that Mo'adei Hashem, that these are the Mo'adim of Hashem. What kind of a ribui can we derive from this pasuk as Mo'adei Hashem, which is redundant? Pesach. The word b'moado only appears with regard to Pesach and with regard to the Tamid. And perhaps we'll find the pasuk here. Let me just see if he quotes the pasuk. Okay, right now I don't have the pasuk, but anyway, the word b'moado appears both in Pesach and in Tamid. And what does the word b'moado means? That it's time sensitive, it's urgent. B'moado afilu b'Shabbos, b'moado afilu b'Tumah. So he tells you where to look up the psukim. One is in Bamidbar Perek Chaf Ches, and the other is in Perek Tes. So now we have the principle that a korban tzibur is docha Shabbos, a korban tzibur is docha Tumah, and that's written only with regard to 2 korbanos, where it says b'moado, and that is the Tamid and the Pesach. Shar korbanos tzibur minayin. How do we know that we can expand this principle of being docha Shabbos, being docha Tumah, to all korbanos tzibur? Elitasul Hashem b'moadechem. Again, in Perek Chav Tes in Sefer Bamidbar, after listing all the musafim of the Yomim Tovim, it teaches us that the korbanos are brought even on Shabbos. Minayin l'Ravos Omer ve'akorev imo. So akorev imo means that there was a keves that was brought together with the Omer. Shtei alechem the hikarev imo imohem, meaning the shnei kvasim of the atzeres. Now I'm not exactly sure why do we need an extra ribui for these. Let me just take a shot at it. See, the kvasim, it's interesting did not appear in Parshas Emor together with these psukim that we've been darshaning b'Moadechem. These kvasim are mentioned only in Parshas Pinchas. So therefore, the halacha b'Moadechem would not ipso facto apply to these kvasim. And if I'm not mistaken, the reason why these kvasim are not mentioned in Parshas Emor, but only in Parshas Pinchas, is because they're only an accompaniment to either the Omer in the case of the 16th of Nisan or the Shtei Lechem in the case of Chag HaShavuos. And therefore, Talmud Lomer, Vaydaber Moshe Esmo Ade Hashem, and this is a pasuk in Parshas Emor, and what does it say there? It says, Vaydaber Moshe Esmo Ade Hashem. So why did the Torah add that? And the answer is it added it to refer to the Omer and to the Shtei Lechem and their accompanying kfos. Hakosav kava moed lekulam. So basically, all karbanos tzibur, whether it's the Omer, the Shtei Lechem, or the kfosim that accompany them, all are brought even on Shabbos and even B'tum. Lamai. What are we talking about? Are we talking about the Omer in this brisa for the Akrovas Omer? Ilim Akrova. I mean, do we need a pasuk to tell me that the Akrovas Omer or the bringing of the Shtei Lechem override the Shabbos? That can't be. There is no Akrov in the case of Shtei Lechem. The Akrov is on the Kvasim, not on the Shtei Lechem. Shtei Lechem b'nei Akrovinu el pshita l'tchina v'arkada. So we're talking about the Shtei Lechem in terms of preparing the flour for the baking of the Shtei Lechem. And preparing the flour requires, number one, tchina, which is crushing the wheat, the kernels of wheat. Hakada means sifting. And both of these are violations of Meleches Shabbos. And we now have an extra ribui from Es Moadei Hashem to tell me that these malachos that are necessary to prepare the Shtei Lechem override the Shabbos. But again, these are malachos that are only necessary as preparation for the Shtei Lechem. And therefore, if the brisa from Elam Moadei Hashem is deriving both Shtei Lechem and the Omer, then Kavasi Gamia Omer, what would be the parallel in the case of the Omer to the Harkada Netchina of the Shtei Lechem? It's got to be the Kavasi Gamia Omer L'Ktsira. Right? The Ktsira is the preparation for the Avos Omer. And yet V'Kadochi Es HaShabbos. And this entire brisa, right? Let's go back to Vatanya, Rebbe Omer. This is Rebbe. So anyway, we see that Rebbe allows to override the Shabbos for the sake of Ktsirus Omer, so that undermines everything we've been saying now. Ella, the Gemara says, when the Brisa mentions the Omer, it's Omer lehakrova. Now, again, how can it be Omer lehakrova? It's got to be parallel to Shtei Lechem. And in Shtei Lechem, we have Harkada and Tchina, which is not parallel to the bringing of the Omer. And the answer is there is a parallel. Why? Because Shtei Lechem lafia. The baking of the Shtei Lechem is itself a Maisa Kiddush, and it violates the Shabbos because Afia is one of the 39 Malachos. Ksava Rebbe Taner Mekadesh, which means that you cannot prepare the Shtei Lechem the day before Shavuos. Because if you prepare the Shtei Lechem before Shavuos through Afiyah, then the Tanur of the Afiyah itself is Mekadesh, and therefore the Shtei Lechem become possible Belina if you wait, and you have to wait till tomorrow, till Shavuos, is Ifsalei Belina. So it must be that shtei lechem cannot be baked before the Shabbos because that would be possible for lina, and therefore the baking of the shtei lechem overrides the Shabbos. And the baking of the shtei lechem overriding the Shabbos is parallel to the akravas ha'omer, which overrides the Shabbos. But Rebbe insists that the Ktsiras Homer is not Docha Shabbos. Now the Gemara goes on a little bit of a tangent from our perspective. V'sava Rebbe Tanur Makadish Vatanya, I'm going to prove to you from a brisa that it's not the Tanur that's Makadish Shtelichem, but rather the Shchita of the Kvasim. Kivsei Atzeres Ein Makadshim Es Halechem El B'Shchita. So it seems, and this is Rebbe now, that the Makadish of the Shtei Alechem is not the Tanur and the Afir, but rather the Shchita of the Kivsei Atzeres, Ketzad, and therefore the Shchita of the Kivsei Atzeres has to be Lishman. Not only that, not only the Shchita, but the Zrika of the Dam of the Kvasim, the Shtei Kivsei Atzeres has to be done Lishman, and then and only then is it Makadish the Shtei Alechem. Shchatam lishman v'zarktam lishman, fine, kiddush halechem. But shchatam shelo lishman v'zarktam shelo lishman, lo kiddush halechem. Shchatam lishman v'zarktam shelo lishman, or right. So the shchita was lishma, but the zrika of the dam was shelo lishma. Is halechem kodesh ve'ena kodesh, right? That's a different sugya that we had back at the beginning of Menachos. To be Rebbe, Rebbe Loso, Rebbe Shimon Omer, Liolam Eino Kodesh Ashishcha Lishma v'Yizrok Damim Lishma. All right, so this has to do with Kiddush Hasdamim and Kiddush Saguf. So that requires a chazara for what we did way back when. In any event, in the Brisa, Rebbe is saying that the Shtei Alechem is Mekudash through the Shechita. Not of the Kivsei Atzeres, not through baking, not through the Tanur. Rav Nachbar Yitzchak, we're going to change the language of the Brisa. Hukba v'lo hukba kamar. So we take out the word kiddush and we put in hukva. Is that the? Just let me double check. That's the word we're taking out. Yeah. Instead of kiddush, we're going to do hukva. Hukva has to do with the fact that there's an absolute linkage between the Shnei Kvasim and the Shtei Alechem, which means that if the Kvasim get lost or puzzle or tame or whatever it might be, then the Shtei Alechem are gone. You can't reconnect the Shtei Alechem to another two Kvasim, and that's because there was already a shchita of the kvasim. So again, the kiddush of the shtei alechem was done in the tanur and the afir, and that has to be done on the day of the 16th, even if it means overriding the Shabbos. And we have the pasuk of Moed Hashem to be marba, violating the Shabbos for the sake of the shtei alechem. The shtei alechem cannot be baked on erev Shabbos because then they would be possible lina, because Rebbe holds that afia b'tanur is makadish the lechem. Once it's kiddush lechem, then the next day it's possibly din lina. The Brisa seems to assume that it's the shchita, the kvasim, that's makadish the lechem, and not the afia b'tanur. The answer is, says Rav Nachman, that what the Brisa is referring to is kvius. Kvius means to generate an absolute linkage between these two kvasim and the shtei alechem. Hadron alecha Rabbi Shmuel. And now we begin the 7th parak, which is the Elu Menachos. Just see how much time we have. Oh, we don't have much time. Ve'el menachos nikmatzos v'shirehem lakonim. We have a whole list of 10 menachos here, and the principle of the menachos is this kmitza, and after the kmitza, the kometz is burnt on the mizbeach, and the shiraim are given to the kohanim for achila. And here's the whole list, which Rav Papa is going to say excludes the Shita Rav Shimon. Odmat, we'll see it. Minchas hasoles, v'amachvas, v'macheches, v'achalos. Right, there's a Minchas Mafe, which is called Chalos, Verakikin, that has two parts to it. It's also Minchas Chalos, which are matzos, and also a Minchas Rikikin. And we'll see the sheet of Rabbi Shimon in a minute that you could take 5 of each, which is another carbon mincha. But we're holding now the Chacham, it's got to be all 10 Chalos or all 10 Rikikin. You can't mix the two together. Minchas Ovei Kochavim, in the case of a shogeg violation of Avodas Kochavim, Minchas Noshim, Minchas Omer, Minchas Chote, Minchas Knos, Rav Shimon Omer. Oh, so now we get to a different sheet of Rav Shimon, not the Rav Shimon that I mentioned before, that you could divide up a Minchas Mafeh 5 Rikikim and 5 Chalos, but rather Minchas Chote Shekolim. Oh, so in the list of all the menachos that require kmitza, one particular mincha is abstrusely omitted from the Mishnah, and that's the minchas chote shalkon, because minchas chote shalkon is kula kolil, and there's no point to do the kmitza because the kmitza is meant to be mata the shirayim, and the shirayim are necholim lekohanim, but in the case of a minchas chote shel kohanim, it's kula kol, it's completely burnt, so kmitza is out of the question, therefore it's not listed. But Reb Shimon wants to list Minchas Chote Shel Konik Metzes. But what happens after the Kmitza is the Kometz Karv Liatzmo, V'Shirayim Krev Liatzmo. So you'll do 2 Akrobos. You'll do 2 Haktoros on the Mizbeach, first of the Kmitza, and then on the rest of the Shirayim. Omer Rav Papa Kol Heicha Desnan. Wherever we see in the Mishnah enumerating the list of all the menachos, Eser, tonight's only 10. My Kamashma, what does Rav Papa want to teach us? Lafuki Rav Shimon, the Omar, Mechzechals Mechzer Kikim Yovi, with a Minchas Mafe, you could do it 5 and 5, and therefore we would have to jack up the number from 10 to 11, Kamashma and Dulum. V'Shireim L'Kohanim, right, where do we know that the Shiraim go to the Kohanim? So that's explicit in the Torah. So the Gemara says, Minol, what do you mean, Minol? D'chsiva. Ksiva, you're asking where it says it. It's written. Udalo Ksiva. And where the Torah doesn't mention that the Shiraim are eaten by the Kohanim, then the Shiraim are not eaten by the Kohanim, which is going to be the case of a Minchas Chote, or the Mincha of Avodah Zarah that we mentioned before. Ksiba. V'zos Torah Mincha Krevos Bnei Aaron V'Nosers Mimeni Yochlu Aaron Ubanov. So it says explicitly that what was left after Kmitza is eaten by Aaron Ubanov. So what are you asking me? Where does it say in the Torah that the Shiraim is eaten by the Kohanim? And the Gemara reformulates the original question. I never asked you about a mincha that comes from chitim, but there are 2 menachos that come from siorim. And those are the Minchas Knos of a Sota and the Minchas HaOmer. Kikirim Boilo, Bo B'Sorim. How do we know that the process of Kmitza will be Matu the Shiraim in these cases of Minchas Siorim, which are these 2 cases that we mentioned? And the one says, I don't get it. I still don't get your question. Bo B'Sorim Nami. Mida B'Knetzes, Shira, Lakod. I mean, the Torah says you have to do Kmitza on these 2 Menachos, and obviously the Shiraim go to the Kohanim to be eaten by the Kohanim. And the Gemara says, I'll leave it there upon and lo kami boilach. Ki kami boilach, I'll leave Reb Shimon the Omer, Ika mincha the Kmitza v'lo mis akla, right? We have 2 cases, according to Reb Shimon, where we do the mincha, even though there's no heter of Shiraim to the Kohanim. Disnan, as we saw in our Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon Omer Minchas Chote Shel Kohanim, even though it's Kula Kolil, nevertheless is Kmitza. HaKometz Karev Liatzmo, Shiraim Karev Liatzmo. Minol. How do we know even in these cases of Rabbi Shimon still has a right to derive from biblical exegesis that the Shiraim has to be burnt on the Mizbeach, but there has to be a Kmitza. Amachizkiyamer Kra called Mincha Belula v'Shemen v'Chareva l'Chol b'Rei Aaron Tiyeh. Now, this pasuk is completely superfluous because the pasuk says blula b'shemen, and blula b'shemen is explicit in the Torah. In Eino Inyan, so we're going to apply one of the methods by which we derive conclusions. In Eino Inyan, in Eino Blula Chitin, today Linyan Blula shall see Orin, Vein Inyan Lechareva shall Chitin, today Linyan Chareva shall see Orin. Okay, then, so this is where we'll stop for today. Tomorrow is Wednesday. How did that happen? Okay, so tomorrow, Mr. Shem, we meet at 12 noon. I don't know if you're free at that time. Maybe you're in Ulpan. I don't know. Have a great day.